Oh, good, we have sound. So my name's Louise. I'm going to be doing a presentation on access work, or data and access work, and considering we have a kind of interdisciplinary crowd today, I thought it would be quite a good place to start, that actually right in front of me now, to do this presentation, I have 4 screens in front of me, so you can expect some glitches at times, and if something becomes incoherent, please feel free to stop and get me to repeat it. So, actually, before I start, I do want to thank Erin and Robert for inviting me to talk today, because they invited me. We went down this path of them themselves doing a lot of access work and enabled for me to be here. So I'm kind of flagging that up in the spirit of the presentation today, is me to kind of thinking about what did it mean to invite a kind of like a deaf, disabled scholar to present their work. I'm sure we can talk about that afterwards in the Q&A, because we're kind of pushed for time. So, okay, so the title of the talk is Data and Access Work. And on the kind of right over here, I have a cheeky little steno draft or steno forms of the kind of words on the left, which is actually the focus of my talk today, is thinking about how real-time speech is mediated in real time. So, to kind of give you some kind of the background of my talk today, I'm actually going to switch to a publication recently done by AI Now, in which they started to think about disability bias and AI. Let me switch here. And I'm going to ask Evan to read this quote aloud for me.
Data. In modeling the world through data, AI systems necessarily produce and reflect a normative vision of the world. These systems function to classify new information based on a given model. Does a novel input comport with the model or constitute an outlier? Is it normal or aberrant?
Thank you, Evan. So it's interesting, like I was talking about the interdisciplinary earlier, and in the previous 2 talks, we started thinking about biases. The authors of this report, Meredith Whittaker, co-founder of AI, Cindy Bennett, who works in HCI, Mara Mills, who is a historian of technology, and I think Sarah Hendren, who works on disability design. These are like some of the authors that came together to think about what these biases mean. So the kind of 3 operative words of this kind of quote here is normative vision, new information, and normal. And I've highlighted these term to think about some of the underlying tension that when we move forward and we're thinking about real-time access, what does this mean? So to these bring about several questions, which I highlight, not that slide, which bring about several questions. So how does data set capture the fluidity of identity and lived experience of disability? How is normalcy becomes encoded and amplified by AI systems? And when I say normalcy is a term that is used by disability studies scholar Lennis Davis, where he really thinks about the effect of capitalization on the disabled body. So in one way that he articulates this is he thinks about the bell curve. You know, we have the distribution of normalcy in the center, and then to the edges we have the deviance and the extremes. So, which obviously had eugenic undertones, which I think this will help us to think about the bell curve, actually start to help us to think about the standardization of technology and how that may butt against the kind of conversations that are happening in disability studies. So, as I was talking about the interdisciplinary of the authors, this one thing they found in examples is that no matter how much extra data, additional data you put into the system, you are never going to resolve some of these kind of extreme circumstances, which I think is evident from this conference itself. Disability is not singular, right? So, what norms are being reproduced? What happened to the outliers, the deviants, the other bodies that don't quite fit into the system? And lastly, a rather pressing question that I cannot address today in this talk is, when disability is validated, what are the issues of privacy and surveillance? So, I'm moving from data and now thinking about my research area is thinking about access work. So thinking about through these kind of data and we're thinking about these extremes is that I kind of want to make an intervention here and thinking about how access is mediated through labor practices, and so how the expertise are valued and how we come to produce and maintain accessibility. So the kind of focus of the way that I'm going to anchor access work for us today is thinking about sonography. So behind me, I have a kind of artwork produced by a hobbyness stenographer. There's a lot of them out there. There might be some here today. And this is a 23 keyboard. You often see them in courtrooms. There's one here today. And they use the phonetic system to kind of produce real-time work. And in particular, the kind of thinking about sonography, I'm really interested in thinking about CART operators, C-A-R-T, computer-aided real-time reporting or something like that, yeah. So this is the appealing to the nerds amongst us today. But this image is actually the first real-time machine. Was invented in 1987, which is, I think is actually quite amazing because some of the attributes of real-time work is mobility. And so this is something that does not quite epitomize that kind of mobility. So thinking, through some of the issues of what access work is, I'm thinking about how disability studies and kind of STS and all these disciplines come together, the human and the machine, and to form a collegial intimacy. And the collegial intimacy in this setting is like thinking about how we recreate these kind of formal networks, formal system within these kind of settings. And so in some ways, this is about care, but it's not about care. So there's this tension there that kind of moves between the two. So by thinking about collegial intimacy through these kind of way that these systems hang together, is that I'm attending to the labor-intensive descriptions of real-time work, which is often mischaracterized by the state and the non-state actors' definitions of access, okay, which I think will come out as the kind of talk goes on, in the sense that here is, on the right here, we have the actual the CAT system, the computed aid time transcription, which takes the kind of input that's provided by the sonographer and turns it into readable English. And so in some ways, this real-time work is different in many respects because the coding of speech also happens in real time, which is what makes this so interesting. So on the left, I'm doing it backwards here, on the left we have the kind of notes. And these notes have been really interesting kind of objects in the way that I have been thinking about access, in the sense that these are the notes that sonographers, cart providers knew to kind of take this kind of quick note of what they're doing in real time. So they can't program, they can't. But actually what I discovered is that when I would talk to the various sonographers, actually these notes, and this is the one that really flagged up my kind of attention, that this post-it note, which has this is a particular sonographer who moved from education into broadcasting, okay? And so all of a sudden she was in flux with these new kind of vocabulary that wasn't necessarily belong to the classroom. And so in this sense, what I really was confused about is when I would talk to sonographers and say, what's your methodology? They would be like, oh, da-da-da-da. And some of them had a history with sonography training schools. And these were on the ground. There were two in Southern California. They've closed in the last 10 years, and they've all kind of been moved online. But the training schools in themselves had a community of practice, and no community practice kind of had tricks of the trades. And one of these would be the kind of note-taking, these notes. And for some, it was a secret. And for others, it was a really controversial in the sense, oh no, I do not use them, that is just ridiculous. And I couldn't understand why there was this kind of variation between them. And then to think, well, actually, it was the school training program that meant that they have to become like machines, right? So these notes, these post-it notes, for some were actually a distraction from this kind of becoming the machine, the mechanical kind of writer. In this sense, hang on. So these desires are echoed. Oh no, we're really running out of time? 4 minutes? Okay, let me have a look ahead here. Okay, we're going to do a crash course here. Okay, I'm going to look at my slides and we're going to hope for the best. Okay, so here we have this is kind of the mid-century stereotype of the sonographer. Okay. You don't really find cart reporters in the archive, really, unless they're preparing for emergencies, right? And so this is the public imagination means that at the end of the phone or the end of the kind of disaster preparations, which is a requirement of the ADA, there always has to be some figure at the end. In the kind of history, thinking about how this occurred, there's also this other thing going on where the stenographers are moving to the background, they're moving to the backstage, they're becoming privatized. Disability is becoming privatized. And so this, in some ways, what I want to flag up in thinking about the privatization of disability is that thinking about what does that mean in post-ADA. So real-time writing, in contrast to courtroom work, is significantly different. It's in the sense that in the 90s onwards, there's this kind of economy of building on real-time work. And that economy of real-time work it becomes, and this is a clip from daytime television show where there's these two celebrity sonographers who are competing against each other with the accuracy level at 97%. Okay, so this is how it differs from courtroom work, because in the courtroom you adjust your tech afterwards. So why is this important? Well, in thinking about the 19th onward and thinking about real-time work, is actually they have developed within themselves an economy of creating this speed and efficiency, and that actually disavows the kind of work they do. And so if we have time in the Q&A, I can maybe talk about the kind of displacement, the devaluation of this type of labor that actually impact on kind of the collegial aspect of their labor, the collegial intimacy of their labor. One way that more recently, in the last 2 years, IBM has, in their local broadcasting network, have defunded real-time writers to enact this system. This is inaccurate, has a lot of problems, and it kind of really moved toward this idea that information is neutral and it has to be moved from one medium to another. So it had no reflection on the kind of embodiment, etc. So I'm hoping maybe I can pick up on some of the strands I've left out in the Q&A, but thank you.